They laughed when I walked into that dining room. They whispered when I sat down in my worn uniform. But when my commander's voice cut through their mockery like a blade, when he said those 3 words that changed everything, their laughter died in their throats. This is the story of how a single moment turned a lifetime of humiliation into the sweetest victory I've ever tasted. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and for 28 years, I've been the family disappointment, the black sheep, the failure, the one they whisper about when they think I can't hear. While my cousins became doctors, lawyers, and successful entrepreneurs, I chose a different path, a path that led me to dusty bases in Afghanistan, sleepless nights in Iraq, and classified missions that I could never talk about at family gatherings. But to them, I was just Sarah who couldn't make it in the real world. The invitation came on a Tuesday morning, slipped under my apartment door like a verdict, gold lettering on cream paper, the kind my Aunt Margaret loved to flaunt. Annual Mitchell Family Reunion, Sunday, 2 p.m., formal attire requested. I stared at that invitation for a long time, my coffee growing cold in my hands. 3 years. It had been 3 years since I'd seen them. 3 years since the last time they'd made it crystal clear that I didn't belong. My phone buzzed. A text from my younger sister Emma. Please come. Mom really wants you there. Mom. The one person in that house who still looked at me with love instead of pity. I should have thrown the invitation away. Should have worked that Sunday like I always did. But something in my chest, some stubborn piece of hope I thought I'd buried in the desert, made me reach for my dress uniform instead. The Mitchell family estate sat on Maple Street like a monument to success. White columns, manicured lawns, and the kind of perfect that only old money could buy. I'd grown up in the shadow of this house, watching my cousins play in gardens I was never quite good enough to belong in. I parked my beat-up Honda between a Mercedes and a BMW, feeling like an imposter already. The dress uniform felt strange after months of civilian clothes. The weight of my ribbons and medals against my chest was both familiar and foreign. I'd earned every single one of them in places these people couldn't even pronounce. But here, they felt like costume jewelry. As I walked up the front steps, I could hear laughter spilling from the dining room windows. Rich, careless laughter that belonged to people who'd never had to question their place in the world. Emma opened the door before I could knock. Her face lit up with genuine joy, and for a moment, I remembered why I'd come. Sarah, you look... She paused, taking in my uniform. You look different. Strong. Before I could respond, Aunt Margaret's voice cut through the air like fingernails on chalkboard. Well, well, look who decided to grace us with her presence. The dining room fell silent as I walked in. 23 pairs of eyes turned to study me like I was a specimen under glass. The table was set with Margaret's finest china, the kind she only brought out when she wanted to remind everyone of their place in the family hierarchy. Sarah! My mother's voice was warm honey in a room full of ice. She stood quickly, nearly knocking over her wine glass. I'm so glad you came. But before she could reach me, my cousin Richard's voice boomed across the room. Hey everyone, look! It's G.I. Jane! He raised his wine glass in mock salute. Still playing soldier, Sarah? The laughter that followed felt like acid in my veins. Now, Richard, Uncle Tom chuckled, not bothering to hide his smirk. Be nice. Not everyone can handle a real career. My cousin Jessica, fresh from her promotion to partner at some law firm, looked me up and down with practiced disdain. Are those participation ribbons? She gestured at my chest with her perfectly manicured hand. More laughter. Louder this time. I felt my cheeks burn, but I kept my spine straight. Military bearing. Never let them see you break. They're service ribbons, I said quietly. Service ribbons for what? Richard leaned forward, his face flushed with wine and malice. Serving coffee to the real soldiers. The room erupted in laughter. Even some of the older family members were smiling behind their hands. I stood there frozen, as 28 years of insults and dismissals crashed over me like a tsunami. Every family gathering where I'd been the punchline. Every holiday where they'd asked when I was going to get a real job. Every birthday where my achievements were brushed aside like dust on expensive furniture. But this time was different. This time, I had a secret. You know what I think? Aunt Margaret's voice cut through the laughter like a scythe. She stood at the head of the table, wineglass in hand, looking like a queen addressing her subjects. I think it's time Sarah faced reality. All this soldier nonsense, it's just her way of avoiding real responsibility. Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. "She's almost 30, continued Margaret, her voice gaining momentum. "No husband, no children, no real career. Just playing dress-up in someone else's uniform." My mother started to stand. "Margaret, that's enough." "No, Linda. Someone needs to say it." Margaret's eyes locked onto mine with laser precision. "Sarah needs to stop living in Fantasyland and join the real world. Maybe then she'll understand what actual success looks like." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel every eye in the room on me, waiting for my response, waiting for me to crumble like I always had before. But something had changed in me over the years. Something forged in the crucible of combat, tempered by loss, and strengthened by the knowledge of who I really was. I was about to speak when my phone rang. The ringtone was different from my usual one. Sharp, urgent, official. Everyone at the table turned to look as I glanced at the screen. The caller ID made my blood run cold and my heart race at the same time. "Excuse me," I said quietly, stepping away from the table. "I need to take this." "Oh, of course," Richard called out mockingly. "Let me guess. The Pentagon needs your expertise on lunch strategy?" More laughter followed me as I walked to the hallway. "This is Captain Mitchell," I answered, my voice automatically shifting to military formality. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and utterly serious. "Captain Mitchell, this is General Harrison's office. The General requires your immediate presence at the Pentagon. A situation has developed that requires your specific expertise." My throat went dry. "Sir, I'm currently on family leave. This is a direct order from the General, Captain. National security level. How quickly can you be here?" I glanced back at the dining room where my family was probably still making jokes at my expense. 2 hours, sir." "Outstanding. A car is already en route to your location. ETA 7 minutes. The line went dead. I stood in that hallway, staring at my phone, as the magnitude of what was about to happen hit me like a freight train. They had no idea. None of them had any clue who I really was. When I walked back into the dining room, the conversation stopped. 23 faces turned to me with expressions ranging from amused curiosity to barely concealed contempt. "Everything all right, sweetheart?" My mother's voice was concerned. Before I could answer, Richard jumped in. "Let me guess. They need you to guard the cafeteria?" The laughter was immediate and cruel. "Actually," I said quietly, "I have to leave." "Already?" Aunt Margaret's smile was sharp as broken glass. "But we were just getting started. I was about to tell everyone about your last visit when you tried to convince us you were doing something important in the military." She made air quotes around the word important, and the room chuckled appreciatively. "Margaret, please," my mother said, but her voice was weak, defeated. "No, Linda. Sarah needs to hear this." Margaret stood up, wine glass in hand, clearly enjoying her moment. "We've all been tiptoeing around it for years, but someone needs to tell her the truth." She turned to face me directly, her eyes glittering with malicious satisfaction. "You're a disappointment, Sarah. To this family, to yourself, to everyone who ever believed in you. This whole military thing is just an elaborate way of avoiding the fact that you're not good enough for the real world." The words hit me like physical blows. I felt every syllable land, felt them burrow into the parts of me that still, despite everything, wanted their approval, wanted to belong. "You're 28 years old," Margaret continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You have no husband, no children, no real career, no money, no prospects. You live in a tiny apartment, drive a car older than some of these wine bottles, and your biggest accomplishment is, what, following orders?" The room was completely silent now. Even the cruel laughter had died away, replaced by the kind of horrified fascination people have when watching a car crash. "So please," Margaret raised her wine glass in mock toast, "spare us the dramatics about having to leave for important military business. We all know you're probably going back to your apartment to eat cereal for dinner and watch Netflix alone." The laughter that followed was the worst yet, not just from the men this time, but from the women too. From cousins I'd played with as children, from aunts who'd bounced me on their knees, from uncles who'd taught me to ride a bike. I stood there, feeling the weight of 28 years of judgment crushing down on me, and then I heard it, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Not just any car, but the distinctive rumble of a government vehicle. Through the dining room window, I watched as a black SUV with government plates pulled up behind my Honda. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a man in dress blues. My heart stopped. It was Master Sergeant Rodriguez from the Pentagon, one of General Harrison's personal staff. The entire room turned to look as Rodriguez walked up the front steps with military precision. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing unmistakably official. The doorbell rang. Emma went to answer it, and we could all hear the conversation from the dining room. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Master Sergeant Rodriguez, United States Army. I'm looking for Captain Sarah Mitchell." The word captain hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. Emma's voice was small, confused. "Captain?" "Yes, ma'am." "Is she here?" "I have orders to escort her to the Pentagon immediately." The dining room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Emma appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Sarah, there's a soldier here for you. He called you captain." Every eye in the room turned to me. The laughter had died completely, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like the world had stopped turning. I straightened my shoulders, feeling the familiar weight of command settling around me like armor. "Thank you, Emma." My voice was different now. Stronger, colder. "Tell Master Sergeant Rodriguez I'll be right there." But before I could move, Rodriguez himself appeared in the doorway. His eyes swept the room with professional assessment before locking onto me. "Captain Mitchell." He came to attention with a precision that made the crystal on the table ring. "I apologize for the interruption, ma'am, but General Harrison requires your immediate presence. The situation in Syria has escalated, and they need your assessment." Syria. The word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. I could feel the shock rippling through the room, could see the confusion, the dawning realization, the slow-motion collapse of everything they thought they knew about me. "Understood, Sergeant," I replied, my voice carrying the authority I'd earned in places they couldn't imagine. "How long do I have?" "The General wants you there in 90 minutes, ma'am. We have a helicopter standing by." "Helicopter?" "Pentagon." "General." "Syria." The words were bouncing around the room like ricochets, and I could see the exact moment when understanding hit each of their faces. Richard was the first to speak, his voice barely a whisper. "Captain?" I turned to look at him, this man who'd spent the last hour humiliating me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something I'd never seen before in his eyes. Fear. "Yes, Richard," I said quietly. "Captain." As in, the rank I earned leading combat operations in Afghanistan. The rank that comes with commanding 100 soldiers in life-or-death situations. The rank that requires security clearance higher than anything you'll ever see in your corporate law practice. The color drained from his face. I turned to Jessica next. "Those participation ribbons you were asking about. The Silver Star is for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. The Bronze Star is for heroic service in a combat zone. The Purple Heart is for wounds received in action." Jessica's perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth, but I wasn't done. I turned to face Aunt Margaret, who was standing frozen at the head of the table, her wine glass trembling in her hand. "You wanted to know what my biggest accomplishment is?" My voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a blade. 3 months ago, I led a team that extracted 17 American hostages from a terrorist compound outside Damascus. The mission was so classified that the president himself signed the order. The Secretary of Defense personally pinned my second Silver Star to my chest. Margaret's wineglass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor in a spray of red that looked like blood. "You think I'm a disappointment?" I continued, my voice never rising above a conversational tone, but somehow filling the entire room. "You think I'm avoiding real responsibility? Last year, I was given command of Joint Task Force Phoenix. I'm responsible for coordinating counterterrorism operations across 3 countries. My decisions directly affect American foreign policy in the Middle East." The silence was so complete I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. "You think I have no prospects?" I smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. "Next month I'm being promoted to major. By Christmas, I'll be lieutenant colonel. By the time I'm 35, if I want it, I'll be wearing a general's stars." Rodriguez cleared his throat respectfully. "Ma'am, I don't mean to interrupt, but we really do need to move. The situation is urgent." I nodded. "Of course, Sergeant." I walked around the table slowly, letting my eyes meet each of theirs. Richard, who couldn't hold my gaze. Jessica, who was crying silent tears of shame. Uncle Tom, whose smirk had disappeared entirely. I stopped in front of my mother, who was looking at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "I'm sorry I have to leave, Mom," I said softly, and my voice was gentle again. Only for her. But duty calls. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm so proud of you, baby. I've always been so proud. I kissed her cheek, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume one last time. Then I turned to face the room. You spent this entire lunch telling me I was a failure, telling me I was a disappointment, telling me I was avoiding real responsibility. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. You were wrong about everything. I started walking toward the door, but stopped when I reached Aunt Margaret. She was still standing frozen, staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. The next time you want to humiliate someone, I said quietly, you might want to make sure you actually know who they are first. As I walked toward the door, Rodriguez fell into step beside me. Captain, he said quietly, I should mention, General Harrison asked me to extend his personal apologies for interrupting your family time. He said to tell you that the mission parameters have changed, and he needs someone he can trust absolutely. We reached the front door, and I turned back one last time. The entire family was still sitting in stunned silence around that perfect table, with its perfect china and its perfect crystal, looking like mannequins in a store window, all except Richard, who had found his voice again. Sarah, wait! He stood up quickly, nearly knocking over his chair. We didn't know. I mean, why didn't you ever tell us? I looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd spent years making me feel small, who'd laughed at my uniform, mocked my service, dismissed my sacrifices. You never asked, I said simply, and then I walked out the door. The helicopter was waiting at the Pentagon landing pad, its rotors already spinning. As we lifted off into the darkening sky, I looked down at the city sprawling below us. Somewhere down there, my family was probably still sitting around that table, trying to process what had just happened. Rodriguez handed me a briefing folder marked, Top Secret. Ma'am, the general wanted you to review this during flight. The situation in Syria is more complex than we initially thought. I opened the folder and began reading, my mind automatically shifting into mission mode. This was who I was. This was what I did. This was the life I'd chosen, and the woman I'd become. My phone buzzed with a text message, then another, then a flood of them. Emma. Sarah, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. Richard, please call me. I need to apologize properly. Jessica, I feel sick about what I said. You're incredible. Uncle Tom, we were wrong. So very wrong. And finally, one from Aunt Margaret. I don't know how to apologize for what I said. You're not a disappointment. You're a hero. I turned off my phone and slipped it into my pocket. Through the helicopter window, I could see the Pentagon approaching, its lights cutting through the darkness like a beacon. Inside that building, generals and colonels and policymakers were waiting for my assessment, my expertise, my leadership. They needed me. Not because of my last name or my family connections or my social standing. They needed me because of who I'd become through years of sacrifice, discipline, and service. Because of the woman I'd forged myself into in the crucible of combat and responsibility. As we touched down on the Pentagon landing pad, I thought about that dining room full of people who'd spent their lives mistaking privilege for worth, connections for competence, appearances for accomplishment. They'd laughed at me. They'd mocked me. They'd called me a failure and a disappointment. But when Master Sergeant Rodriguez walked into that room and called me captain, when he mentioned Syria and the Pentagon and generals who needed my expertise, their laughter died in their throats. Because in that moment, they finally saw who I really was. Not Sarah, the family disappointment. Not Sarah who couldn't make it in the real world. But Captain Sarah Mitchell, leader of soldiers, protector of the innocent. Someone whose decisions shaped the fate of nations. Someone who'd earned every ribbon on her chest, every star on her collar, every salute she received. Someone who'd chosen the harder path and emerged stronger for it. As I walked through the Pentagon corridors toward my briefing, my uniform crisp and my bearing proud, I carried with me the memory of their shocked faces, the sound of Margaret's wine glass shattering, the way Richard's voice had cracked when he finally understood. They'd laughed when I walked into that dining room, but when my commander's voice cut through their mockery, when Rodriguez said those words that changed everything, their laughter died, and finally, they saw me. The real me, Captain Sarah Mitchell, and I'd never felt prouder of who I'd become. Epilogue. 6 months later, I received another invitation. This time, it wasn't slipped under my door like a shameful secret. This time, It was hand-delivered by Emma herself, who drove 3 hours to my new base just to see me. "Annual Mitchell family reunion," she said, holding out the cream-colored paper with shaking hands. "But this time is different, Sarah." I was sitting in my new office, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell now, the promotion having come through ahead of schedule, reviewing intelligence reports from my latest mission. The walls were covered with commendations, photos with generals, and a letter of appreciation signed by the president himself. "Different how?" I asked, not looking up from my papers. Emma's voice was small, almost childlike. "They want to honor you. Uncle Tom suggested we hold the entire reunion at the Veterans Memorial Hall. Aunt Margaret, she wants to make a speech about how proud the family is of your service." I finally looked up. My sister's face was a mixture of hope and fear, like someone asking for forgiveness they weren't sure they deserved. "And what do you think, Emma?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "I think they're scared. I think they realize they spent 28 years humiliating a war hero, and now they're terrified that the whole world will find out what they did. Smart girl, my sister. The truth is," she continued, "after you left that day, everything changed. Richard's law firm started asking questions about his famous military cousin for their veteran outreach program. Jessica's been telling everyone at her country club about her hero sister-in-law. And Aunt Margaret." "What about Aunt Margaret?" Emma's laugh was bitter. "She's been researching your medals online. She printed out articles about your missions, the ones that aren't classified anyway. She has them framed in her living room now." The irony was suffocating. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the invitation. Gold lettering on cream paper, just like before. But this time, instead of "formal attire requested," it read, "military dress uniform encouraged." "You know what the funniest part is?" I said quietly. "What?" "If they had just asked, if they had shown even the slightest interest in my life, in what I was doing, in who I was becoming, I would have told them everything. I would have shared my proudest moments with them. I wanted their approval so badly that I would have given anything for it." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Sarah, but they never asked. For 28 years, they never once asked what I actually did in the military. They just assumed it was nothing important because it didn't fit their definition of success." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the base where soldiers were going through their evening drills. My soldiers, my responsibility, my pride. "Do you know what I learned in that dining room 6 months ago?" I asked without turning around. "What?" "I learned that some people will only respect you when the world forces them to, and that kind of respect, it's not worth having." I turned back to face her. "Tell them thank you for the invitation. Tell them I'm honored by their desire to celebrate my service." Emma's face lit up with hope. "And then tell them I respectfully decline." The hope died instantly. "Sarah, please. They've learned their lesson. They know they were wrong." "Have they?" I walked back to my desk and picked up a framed photo. It was from my promotion ceremony, me standing next to General Harrison as he pinned the lieutenant colonel insignia to my collar. My mother was there, tears of pride streaming down her face, but she was the only family member in the photo. Where were they when I received the Silver Star? Where were they when I was promoted to major? Where were they when I was featured on the cover of Military Times as Officer of the Year? Emma had no answer. They weren't there because they didn't know, and they didn't know because they never cared to ask. The only reason they want to honor me now is because my achievements became impossible to ignore. I sat back down and looked at my sister, really looked at her. She was the only one who had always been kind to me, the only one who had never joined in the laughter. "But I'll make you a deal," I said softly. Her eyes brightened again. "Next month, I'm being awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. It's the second highest military decoration in the United States Army. The ceremony is at the Pentagon, and there will be generals, senators, and media coverage." I paused, letting the weight of that sink in. "I get to invite 10 family members. I've already invited Mom. That leaves 9 spots." Emma leaned forward eagerly. "Those 9 invitations go to the family members who can tell me, right now, without looking it up, what my military specialty is, what my current rank is, where I served, what my job actually entails." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "I can," Emma said quickly. "You're Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell. You specialize in counterterrorism operations. You've served in Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria, and you coordinate international military strategy for Emma, I interrupted gently, you drove 3 hours to see me today. You've been following my career for years. You've earned your invitation. Her smile faltered as she understood what I wasn't saying. The rest of them couldn't answer those questions if their lives depended on it. Sarah, she whispered, they're family. No, I said firmly. Family doesn't mock you for 28 years and then suddenly want to claim you when you become famous. Family doesn't laugh at your uniform and then frame articles about your achievements. Family doesn't call you a disappointment and then brag about you to their friends. I stood up again, this time moving to the flag hanging in the corner of my office. The American flag under which I'd served, under which I'd bled, under which I'd earned every honor I possessed. Family supports you when nobody else will. Family believes in you when you don't believe in yourself. Family asks about your life because they care, not because they're trying to find ammunition to hurt you with. I turned back to Emma. You're my family. Mom is my family. The soldiers under my command are my family. The men and women I served with in combat zones are my family. And the people who laughed at me in that dining room? I shook my head. They're just relatives who happen to share my DNA. Emma was crying openly now. What should I tell them? I walked over and hugged her, this sister who had always loved me even when it wasn't popular. Tell them the truth, I said softly. Tell them that Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, decorated war veteran and recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, sends her regards. Tell them she's proud of her service and grateful for the opportunity to defend the freedoms they enjoy. I pulled back and looked into her eyes. And tell them that some revelations come too late. 3 weeks later, I stood in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes as the Secretary of Defense read my citation for the Distinguished Service Cross. The ceremony was being broadcast live on military networks, and I knew that somewhere, in a perfect dining room with perfect china, 22 people were watching me receive the second highest honor their country could bestow. My mother sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter being recognized as a national hero. Emma was beside her, recording everything on her phone so she could show me later. The 8 other chairs I'd reserved for family remained empty. As the secretary pinned the medal to my chest, I thought about that lunch 6 months ago, about the laughter and the mockery and the moment when everything changed. They had called me a disappointment. They had called me a failure. They had said I was avoiding real responsibility. But as I stood there in that hallowed hall, surrounded by the portraits of America's greatest military heroes, I knew something they would never understand. Some people spend their whole lives seeking approval from those who will never appreciate them. And some people learn to find their worth in service to something greater than themselves. I had chosen the harder path. I had earned my place among heroes. I had built a legacy that would outlast their petty judgments and shallow victories. And when my final revelation came, when the world saw who I truly was, their laughter died forever. But mine had just begun. The end. They laughed. They mocked. They dismissed. But when the moment of truth arrived, when the commander spoke my name with respect, when the medals gleamed on my chest, and the world saw my worth, their silence was the sweetest victory of all. This is Sarah's story. This is her final revelation. And sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming everything they said you never could be.